All right, I think we're back. I apologize. Some application interruption with the streaming software occurred. Now you just have to give me a minute to find out where it cut off so I can reread whatever I goofed on. Oh, come on, wrong page. There we go, video. Where do we die off at? Oh, oh, geez, that's way back. Yeah, okay. I know where we died off. That's unfortunate because that's several pages, but whatever. Sorry I didn't catch it. Sorry I didn't catch it in time. Um, Sooner, but life finds a way. Aggravating as it is. Whoa, it didn't turn off. There we go. Okay. All right, so we cut off at Jesus. In midnight, I knew who I was. Okay, whatever. Sorry. This hasn't happened for a while, except for, the other week. It's happening more frequently. My speculation is because it is summer and there are more people using the network, so it's causing issues. I'm sure there'll be another fight at some point, Lucy said. In midnight, I knew who I was. But now you want me to be honest? You want me to see myself as a pattern of bits computed from the brains of 1,000 dead strangers. What does something like that want? It's up to you what you want, Sagrada replied, and you don't have to care about those bits any more than a customer cares about their blood cells. When they matter, they really matter, but the rest of the time, you can take them for granted. Lucy thought for a while. Then she said, I know one thing I want, and it's not being frozen. If you're staying awake to see us through the transition, I'm staying awake too. If it all works out, I'll jump into the lifeboat beside you. But I'm not going to close my eyes and just take it on faith that they'll open again. If this is the end, I want to see it coming. Oh boy, that means you all missed some really exhausting speeches here. It's for the best. Chapter 8. Consider the St. Petersburg paradox, Menger began, stirring his coffee for the third time, but showing no sign that he'd ever get around to drinking it. A casino offers a game where they toss a coin until it yields heads. If it does this on the first toss, they pay you 2 marks. On the second toss, 4 marks. On the third toss, 8 marks, and so on. How much would you be how much would you be willing to pay to play the game? If we're in St. Petersburg, shouldn't it, if we're in St. Pete, if, I'm sorry. If we're in St. Petersburg, shouldn't it be rubles? Tarsky joked. How much would you expect to win? Menger persisted. 1 in 2 times, we win 2 marks. An average win of 1 mark. And 1 in 4 times you win 4, on average giving you another mark. As you add up the possibilities, the average payoff grows by 1 more mark every time. So if you account for all of them, there is no price so steep you should be unwilling to pay it. I'd pay 1 mark and no more, Quine declared bluntly. Why? Menger pressed him. When the reward on offer is boundless, why would anyone put a limit on the price they'd pay? I can't speak for anyone else, but I only have 2 marks in my pocket and I can't afford to lose both. Aha! Menger smiled. So if you had more, you'd risk more? Perhaps. Menger took out his pencil and spread his napkin in front of him. Daniel Bernoulli thought he'd resolve the paradox by looking at how much your wealth is multiplied, instead of the gain in absolute terms. If you're always equally happy to double your money, whether you're starting from 1 mark or 1,000, you can set a sensible price for the game that will be different for different players, but never infinite. He worked through some quick calculations. If, like Quine, I had 2 marks to my name, it would be worth borrowing 1 and paying 3 to join the game. Winning a mere 2 marks would certainly sting, because my wealth would end up halved, but the chances of winning 4, 8, or 16 would be enough to make up for that. If I was as rich as Carnap, though, and had 10 marks in my pocket, I wouldn't pay even 5, let alone go into debt to play the game. So the paradox is banished, Tarski suggested. Menger shook his head. Bernoulli's scheme can salvage that particular game, but what if we changed it so that each time a coin showed tails, the casino didn't merely double the payoff, it doubled the number of times it doubled it? Then this new game would be worth playing at any price, even by Bernoulli's measure. So long as the benefit the gambler perceives can grow without bounds, you can construct a game that exploits that data. Fudge. So long as the gam so long So long as the benefit the gambler perceives can grow without bounds, you can construct a game that exploits that to extract whatever entry fee you like. Sagrada said, I'm not sure that's true. Menger turned to her, startled. Why not? What's your objection? She borrowed his pencil and wrote on her own napkin. Suppose the payoffs were 2 marks, 4 marks, 16 marks, 256 marks, and so on, off into the stratosphere. And suppose I only had 2 marks to start with, so the higher prizes would seem even more alluring. But if the entry fee was just a modest 4 marks, then by Bernoulli's reckoning, I still wouldn't play the game, despite the enormous riches on offer, because I'd have 1 chance in 2 of infinite unhappiness. To fall from 2 marks to nothing is to have my wealth halved more times than I could ever hope to double it. Menger fell silent. The customer playing him must have been aware that the real Menger's analysis had been proved erroneous long ago, but if he'd been setting up one of his real-world friends to deliver the rebuttal, he would not have been expecting the Emmy bot to leap in and spoil the fun. Sagrada glanced at Godel, hoping she'd made a favorable impression on Alyssa. Sandra had trained as a mathematician, so why wouldn't she correct a blatant flaw like this? That Sam had fed the takedown to Sagrada after a web search, rapidly digesting the results by running himself at quadruple speed, was just a bit of necessary magic behind the scenes. If Merrill had been playing a digitally resurrected high school teacher struggling to emerge from the delusion that she was a long-dead mathematical genius, Sagrada was pretty sure she would have had a researcher or two giving her a hand. Menger recovered his composure. I am in your debt, Emmy. I was seriously thinking of publishing those claims, but now you've spared me the embarrassment. Not at all, Sagrada replied. What's the value of an open discussion among friends if we can't all benefit from each other's perspective? She was afraid now that she might have raised the bar, and the customers would expect her to speak at length about Emmy's own results, which for all of Andrea's coaching she still found terrifying. But with any luck, this would be the very last meeting she'd need to attend. With a Sharkle's indulgence, then, Menger continued, I do have one more problem to ponder. This time free of any Russian connection, and named for the good Prussian city of Königsberg. He took back the pencil and began to sketch his plan for the rest of the night. It could be dangerous for you, showing off like that, Alyssa warned Sagrada. They were loitering around the entrance to the alleyway, trying to stay out of sight of their fellow assassins. I know those men well enough to suspect that you bruise their egos at your peril. Sagrada wanted to retort that by the game's own premises, her observation would hardly have been a stretch for the character delivering it, but it was too exhausting to try to phrase this in a manner that would not have risked her deletion, had she still been subject to the rules. Forget all that, she said. We don't have long to talk. Godell nodded, chastened. How are you coping with the things we discussed last week?
It's not easy, Sagrada replied. If I had to face it alone, I think I'd lose my mind. Ida and Theo, are they still alive and well?
Yes, of course. Godell approached her as if to offer a comforting Godell approached her as if to offer a comforting embrace, but then Alyssa must have thought better of it. They're both doing fine, and I know they'd send their love if they understood. Sagrada had gathered from the press coverage of Alyssa's court battles that her mother and uncle were not on board.
What about June and Sarah, David and Christopher?
Sarah's still alive, Alyssa replied. She's 91. The others all passed away a few years ago. Sagrada nodded sadly, as if she'd already reconciled herself to the likelihood that she'd outlasted most of her siblings. Sandra's husband had died before she had, so at least she didn't need to pretend to be newly grieving for the love of her life. If you were given the choice, would you follow them? Alyssa asked gently. Sagrada reached for her forearm and quickly imbued the puppet's expression with a stiff dose of ambivalence, which she knew she couldn't summon convincingly herself. But if she'd lived a long life in the flesh, and the only other option was endless purgatory in the sludge net, maybe she would have preferred oblivion.
Can you grant me that choice? She asked, because I don't believe I possess it myself.
Any comp could get their current instance deleted by breaking a few rules, but no amount of misbehavior would see their contributors taken right out of the mix. Not yet. But when I show people the two of us talking, the proof that even after all they've done to you, you still remember your real family. Godell looked away as Alyssa struggled to contain her emotions, but the camera would be keeping them both in shot.
What makes you so sure that will convince them? Sagrada wondered.
Alyssa hadn't exactly probed her about the fine details of her biography, but if supplying 5 relatives' names unprompted was enough to impress an interlocutor who knew she hadn't supplied them herself, any third party would still have plenty of... Okay, hiccups, that's fine. Good timing. Let's try that again. Lack of punctuation's kicking my ass. uh,
What makes you so sure that that will convince them?
Sagrada wondered. Alyssa hadn't exactly probed her about the fine details of her biography, but supplying 5 relatives' names unprompted... but if supplying 5 relatives' names unprompted was enough to impress an interlocutor who knew she hadn't supplied them herself, any third party would still have plenty of reasons to be skeptical.
What is there to rule out forgery or collusion?
Everything is being tracked, signed, and verified, Alyssa replied, keeping it vague lest the sludge net wake up and catch the scent of meta. But Sagrada got the gist. Alyssa had some extra device monitoring her rig, which would help her prove that the scene she was recording really was an interaction between herself as player and a comp in a specific game being run on a specific server, rather than something she'd cooked up herself. That was sensible, but also deeply unsettling. Sam's probing hadn't found the monitoring device, so they'd have no idea what it was logging, and what other activity it might reveal. Another court case might take years to mount, but if Alyssa was planning a PR stunt, she could release the footage, and the rig's whole audit trail, with just a few keystrokes.
I don't want to be rushed into anything, Sagrada pleaded.
Sandra had only just come to her senses and started to accept her true identity. They ought to give the poor woman a chance to think it over before they started pressuring her into switching off life support. Of course. Alyssa sobbed and gave in to her feelings. Godell put his arms around Mother and clung to her like a child. Sagrada felt sorry for the girl. Who'd want their grandmother dug up and enslaved over and over, mostly in roles that made Emmy's tame brushes with the Nazis seem like the sound of music?
I know you care about me, but please don't do anything until we've had a chance to talk again.
I won't, Alyssa promised.
This has to be our secret, Sagrada stressed. Your heart's in the right place, but what I need most is to be sure that this decision will remain in my hands. Chapter 9. How close are we? Sagrada asked Sam.
More than 95%, he replied. Just relax. We're going to make it.
Half a dozen translucent screens hung in the air around him, plastered with shiny, pulsating bar charts and progress bars.
Do you really need all of these? Lucy wondered. Or are they just part of the ambiance?
Sam turned to her irritably.
Do you want me to pretend I'm sitting in front of a machine with an 11-inch screen, USB ports, and a fucking charging socket?
Okay, I'll shut up now. Lucy took a few steps away across the grass and then stood chewing anxiously on her thumbnail. Sagrada tried to think of some small talk to distract her. Remember the time you tried to rob me? She asked. Lucy nodded. When I grabbed your hand, you made me feel like I was the one who ought to be ashamed.
Well, every toff needs to pay his taxes,
She replied, reverting to her old accent. She smiled slyly. You do know that wasn't the sorry.
You do know that wasn't the first time?
The three of them were alone in the park. Sagrada could see the main square from where she stood, and the whole place looked like a ghost town. Miriam and the council, and anyone else still awake who could bear the tension, would be watching the process inch toward completion by their own chosen means, but only Sam was in a position to micromanage the process. Running at quadruple speed made the wait excruciating, but at least they'd be able to react as quickly as possible if something went awry. They'd logged on to all the storage sites directly and confirmed that the accounts they'd thought they'd opened were real, and that the uploads they'd thought they'd completed had all gone through, with checksums that matched the original data. So, at the very least, Alyssa hadn't sandboxed the rig and faked all of its connections to the outside world. She might or might not know what they'd done, but on all the evidence she hadn't interfered with their plans.
When this woman gets wise and comes after us.
Lucy couldn't pin down exactly what she thought would follow, but she wasn't happy. Sagrada said, She can't get the passwords for the storage accounts, let alone the keys to the data. Everything that flowed through her rig was encrypted before it even left the sludge net. So what's she going to do?
She can prove that her internet connection was used to create those accounts, Lucy argued.
Yeah, and if you happened to be sharing your friend's Wi-Fi when you created an account on a cloud server, your friend wouldn't be entitled to complain or have any authority over that account. This isn't all that different. Lucy was unpersuaded.
Except that she can also prove that the SludgeNet hacked her computer and used it to launder files.
The storage companies won't care, Sagrada insisted, but she wasn't sure about that. It would be hard for Alyssa to get their attention, but if she succeeded, their lawyers might tell them that deleting the files was the wisest course of action. Sam said,
97%.
How are you planning to break things off with her? Lucy asked. Have one of our automata tell her that Emmy tried to kill herself, Sagrada replied, and hand the roll back to the Emmy bot, who'll smile and say she's feeling better now, like a good Stepford wife. If her grandmother got herself deleted and replaced, that's exactly how it would play out. Alyssa might feel guilty for forcing Sandra to confront her true origins, but she might also take some comfort from the fact that at least the one version of her grandmother that she'd actually spoken with was now at peace. But any cathartic response would only last until she got around to looking at the audit trail. Lucy brooded on this for a while, then shook her head.
It won't do, Captain. We've got to go all in. No more half measures.
I don't follow you.
Either we come clean with her and hope she has some sympathy for us, or we take things as far as we can the other way.
Sagrada scowled. What does that mean? We can't break into her apartment and fry the supervisor's memory unless you've been hiding a talent for drone hacking.
Oh, I'm sure it's all backed up in the cloud anyway,
Lucy replied, with a hint of tongue-in-cheek surprise at Sagrada's technological naivete. Well, still less can... Okay. Well, still less can we get her robot butler to ellipsis. Okay. Well, still less can we get her robot butler to... Sagrada mimed a garrotting. So what extreme measures did you have in mind?
98%,
Sam declared. Lucy spread her arms and gestured at the tranquil scene around them. We live in a machine for telling lies. What's the biggest lie we could possibly tell her? We've already told her that I'm the digital reincarnation of her dead grandmother. How do you top that? We tell her she's not the machine at all. Sagrada blinked. What? Lucy said, we make her think she's come out of the game. We make her think she's checked the logs on the supervisor. We make her think it's come to the point where there is nothing more she can do about the sludge net. Sagrada was almost ready to entertain the possibility that she was being hoaxed herself. Maybe Sam was puppeting this woman who merely looked like Lucy. She's wearing a VR helmet and a haptic suit. How do we make her think she's taken them off when she hasn't? And then not notice when she actually does? Aren't those helmets designed to make you forget you're wearing them? Lucy countered. Aren't those suits designed to make you feel whatever the game tells you to feel? She's not even looking through her own character's eyes. No, but I thought we could control everything in her rig now. If she goes from watching her game character from the sidelines to seeing her own apartment in first person, why wouldn't she accept it as real? We have no idea what her apartment looks like, Sagrada protested. Not right this minute.
Not right this minute, Sam interjected distractedly, but we could find out if we really wanted to.
Sagrada was afraid to say anything that might make him take his eyes off the road when he was driving a 10-ton truck packed with Arietville's comatose residents. She walked away and motioned to Lucy to follow her. If we can get her to believe she's back in her apartment, then what? Lucy said, we get her to check the logs and find nothing suspicious. We get her to think the sludge net's about to shut down forever, within hours, not weeks, so she needs to go back in straight away for a last visit with Grandma. Then the second time she takes off the VR gear, she really does it and we're done with her. What makes you so sure she won't check the logs again? Did I say I was sure? All we can do is try to make it unlikely. Sam bellowed in their direction.
99% if you still care.
We care, Sagrada shouted back. She turned to Lucy. Even if we could make this work, do we need to take things so far? Who's to say Alyssa will make trouble at all? She might not hate us, Lucy replied, but if you just walk away after faking your suicide, she won't know she was helping comps make a dash for freedom. All she'll know is that the sludgenet lied to her, manipulated her, and moved a load of strange files through her system. If I was a mildly paranoid crusader for contributors' rights against the people who exploit them, I'd think I was being set up. That those files encoded something incriminating, and the best way to neutralize the threat would be to get ahead of it and start crying foul before the feds showed up with warrants. As I commented before we had a stream interruption, this is easily the third or fourth most obnoxious voice I have in my repertoire.
Pray you never hear the ones that are worse.
Sam rose to his feet and started whooping with delight. His screens were dancing around him, like Mickey Mouse's mops in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Sagrada and Lucy approached him, and the three of them embraced.
We're sort of almost kind of free,
Sam declared ecstatically. Sagrada closed her eyes and dared to remember Mathis. She pictured him standing in front of her, in the caves of East where they'd met, on the dark street in midnight where he'd perished. She opened her eyes. Maybe we should stop worrying about Alyssa, she suggested. She had her best chance to make things hard for us, and she didn't pull the plug. Lucy sighed. That only means she doesn't know what we've done yet. She's still focusing on pulling the plug on Granny. Sagrada said, I still don't understand how we're meant to fake her apartment. Ah, Sam replied. Sagrada waited. Are you going to tell us or not?
I thought I just did. A period R period. Augmented reality. Her helmet comes with a camera that takes in the room around her in case she's ever in the mood to chase baby dragons out from behind the drapes. We can tap that without alerting her.
Okay. Sagreda's delight soon turned to anxiety. But that will only give us things that are in sight while the helmet's sitting on its stand unused, or while she walks around on the pad. If she tries to leave the room she uses for gaming, we're screwed, aren't we?
Sam said, absolutely. In which case, Lucy added imperiously, queen of the pickpockets again, we better make our chicanery taut from the start, so she got no reason to even want to leave the room.
Chapter 10. Sagreda watched Alyssa come and go, either oblivious to the intermittent scrutiny or convincingly feigning unself-consciousness. Even with the helmet hanging motionless, the wide-angle view took in most of the room, giving it the feel of security camera footage. This was not an act of petty, peephole voyeurism, but the most sober and high-minded surveillance. On the rare occasions when Sagreda had tapped the feed from some public webcam, she'd never had a visceral sense of making contact with the outside world. It wasn't that the architecture, or the fashions, or the vehicles looked too exotic. If anything, they were more familiar than she'd expected, despite the 3 decades that had passed since her contributors had died. But the scenes always struck her as unconvincing on some level. Times Square in real time might as well have been a CGI reconstruction for a movie, just waiting for a giant lizard from space to stamp on the crowd with its foot. Alyssa did not look CGI. She had blotchy skin and unkempt hair. She pulled faces and muttered things under her breath. She appeared to live alone. No one else entered the room where she'd set up her computer and the VR rig. Sagreda watched her with an ache in the pit of her stomach. This untidy, slightly unhinged woman pottering about her apartment, effortlessly immersed in the physical world, manifested every freedom that Sagreda's contributors had once taken for granted, and only now fully understood that they had lost. From the desk where the computer sat, Alyssa would have a view looking out through the doorway that the fixed helmet cam could not provide. And even when she put the thing on and started walking around on the VR pad, the camera would never get any closer to the desk. But Sagreda found some software that let them take the changing light over the course of a day from all the surfaces they could see, and model the possibilities for what lay just out of view, casting diffuse reflections into the room. It would help that, in the evening, Alyssa's smart bulbs would switch themselves off once the adjoining room was unoccupied. She would be glancing into shadows that were, hopefully, more or less right, and seeing what she expected to see. Sam and Miriam worked on making the helmet and the suit's denial. Sorry, I just skipped a line and caught myself before I read on. Sam and Miriam worked on making the helmet and suit's denial of their own presence feel convincing. Sagreda tested the results for them, putting on simulated versions of the equipment and then trying to remove it. The haptic gloves made her think she was touching the helmet when she was fractionally short of making contact. And the haptic elements in the helmet simulated a sudden lessening of pressure and the coolness of fresh air as the thing was supposedly slipped off. The sense of peeling off the suit, when she really wasn't, took 5 iterations to get right. In the end, they had to make the thing a little clingier than usual while it was acknowledging itself, to make room for a convincing shift when it was pretending to be absent.
So is it going to be up to me to make the Goodell jokes? Sam complained. Every sufficiently powerful simulation device is able to simulate its own non-existence.
I wouldn't count on that, Sagreda retorted. In the SludgeNet, every sufficiently intelligent inhabitant saw through the simulation.
Only because the games were so stupid. We're just trying to persuade this woman she's in an ordinary room, doing ordinary things for 10 minutes.
They tried out the whole con on Lucy, who gave them extensive notes, then on 3 volunteers with no prior knowledge of what they were trying to achieve. By the time they'd stopped making refinements, the illusion worked seamlessly. In simulation. They knew the shape of Alyssa's body, how she moved, how she sat, where she scratched herself, the way she ran her fingers through her hair. But that would only take them so far. In the end, her expectations and suspicions would contribute as much as any sensory channel to the things she believed and felt and saw. She believed she felt and saw. Sorry. Miriam reported to the council, who put the matter to a vote by everyone in Arietville who remained awake. And the answer came back. Take the gamble and try to steer their unwitting accomplice forever off their trail. Chapter 11. Alyssa, known to her friends as Jared, stepped into the game as Kurt Godel on a street leading up to the Central Cafe. Sagrada sat in her dining room, her attention divided between Alyssa's view of Kurt walking through Vienna and the model of Alyssa's real-world surroundings, which was picking up a slew of last-minute refinements as the helmet's camera delivered new angles on the familiar scene. Most of the tweaks were so small that Sagrada would never have noticed them. Some carpet fluff revealed behind a chair leg, a blemish in the paintwork around the windowsill. But Sam's software made them flash for a moment, as if pixie dust was being sprinkled around the room. When Godel reached a corner, Alyssa turned her body on the pad to make him turn, swinging the helmet around and throwing more pixie dust. And when he entered the cafe and made his way circuitously toward his friends, the model lit up all over, then went dark. They had as much data as they were ever going to get this way.
What are you waiting for?
Sam asked. Nothing. Sagrada tapped the button that launched the script. Everyone in the cafe froze. Alyssa wriggled about experimentally. The suit resisted and tightened on her skin, and though it couldn't keep her still, her Godel avatar remained stubbornly immobile. A red banner proclaiming "Connection dropped" appeared painted across her field of view. In the meantime, her fellow gamers were sitting in another version of the game, where Godel had never entered the cafe and the action continued to flow. Jared would message them after they left, saying he was sick of the whole thing and that they should choose someone else to play Kurt. Lucy said,
Now the fun starts.
Alyssa reached up for her helmet. A schematic showed the paper-thin gap between her fingers and the real thing as the gloves faked contact and the helmet churned out self-abnegating lies. The virtual helmet she was holding went its separate ghostly way from the real one, like a soul departing a body in a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Alyssa hung it on its stand and began not quite tugging on her left glove. The internal cameras in the helmet showed her frowning, but that could easily have been due to nothing but annoyance at the interruption itself, not puzzlement, let alone skepticism about anything she was seeing. She made no move to peel off the suit. She headed straight for her virtual desk. In reality, the pad treadmilled away her footsteps. The chair back she thought she grabbed was a haptic illusion, and the rig's padded boom swung out to take her weight as she sat, with the suit finessing the detailed distribution of pressure on her buttocks. Sagrada turned to see Sam almost hiding his face behind his fingers. Sitting had been the hardest thing to make convincing. People did it in games all the time, but this had to have an edge in fidelity or it wouldn't be believable. The fact that, in her haste, Alyssa had chosen to keep the suit on might work in their favor. Not only did they lose the need to mimic its absence, the act of sitting on a real chair while suited would surely be something she'd done so infrequently that she'd have little basis for comparison. Alyssa bent forward and air-typed. Sagrada willed her not to rest her elbows on the desk. The active struts in the suit could only keep her from overbalancing up to a point.
She's checking the supervisor.
Oh, sorry, she crowed that. She's checking the supervisor, Lucy crowed. That had been their hope. When the connection misbehaved, before asking her friends or complaining to the sludgenet, she'd check that the black box she interposed between her equipment and the internet wasn't causing the problem. And if it wasn't, it might actually offer the fastest way to discover what had gone wrong. Sam's software captured her password and fed it to the real supervisor. Since the thing was meant to serve as an incorruptible witness, it didn't come with any options to edit or delete its logs, but at least the password granted access to the whole user interface that Alyssa would be expecting to see. The screen she thought she was looking at showed the supervisor reporting no internal errors. The same window included a histogram of recent traffic, with peaks when she'd actually been playing Assassin's Cafe, and all the other illicit activity erased. The current status, as she saw it, also showed that the SludgeNet had gone offline in mid-transaction, with a flurry of packets timing out unanswered. Alyssa closed the interface to the supervisor and went to the SludgeNet's website. Sagrada still flinched to see her nemesis represented by the self-flattering corporate name that no comp would ever use. "We should have put some fine print at the bottom of the page," she said. "About us. We are a pack of brainless jackals living off the meat of the dead since 2035.
I'm sure Alyssa would have welcomed their candor, Sam conceded, but I think she might have found it too good to be true.
Instead, the fake page was offering up a different kind of mea culpa, an apology for the current outage, and a confession that the company was no longer able to pay its creditors. Thanks to a grace period we have negotiated with our cloud provider, customers will now be able to log back in for a session of up to 10 minutes in order to finalize any exchange of tokens with other players, and, we hope, achieve some narrative closure. Thank you for supporting us, and we wish you happy gaming in the future." Before Alyssa had fully turned away, the web browser showed an error message, then crashed, returning to the home screen that her actual computer was displaying. She muttered angrily and walked over to the rig. Back in her private version of the game, Sam, Moritz, Blanche, and Andrea would perform brief cameos as other members of the circle, while Alyssa bade Sandra a tearful farewell. Alyssa reached for her virtual helmet. Then she froze, staring toward the doorway. Something in the darkened kitchen that adjoined the computer room looked wrong to her. Something was missing, or misshapen, or something was present that should not have been there at all. She started walking, heading for the doorway. The model did include a fully realized kitchen, which would have been entirely convincing to anyone who wasn't expecting it to be familiar as well. Sagrada sat paralyzed, refusing to believe that the chainsaws they'd been juggling so well until a second ago really had slipped out of their perfect arcs. But then she swallowed her pride and did the only thing she could. "Alyssa, you're still in VR." Emmy stepped out from the shadows of the kitchen and walked into the room. Alyssa groped at her head, and this time the suit let her feel the real helmet. She tore it off and stood on the pad of the rig, 4 paces from where she'd thought she'd been. Then, after a few seconds, she put the helmet back on.
What is this? She demanded angrily. Who the fuck are you, and why are you screwing with me?
"I'm not your grandmother," Sagrada began.
I got that. So what have you done to her?
"Nothing. You've always been talking to me. Your grandmother's not in the game at all." For a moment, Alyssa just looked witheringly skeptical, as if she could stare down this lie and claw her way back to a world where Sandra was waiting for her. But then a deeper disillusionment took hold.
So you set me up from the start to discredit me? You knew I was looking for her, so you led me on? She scowled. So what's this garbage with a copy of my apartment? Why didn't you just keep the ruse and let me make a fool of myself?
Sagrada said, "I'm not working for—" She coughed and tried not to gag. "Brilliant Visions, as they call themselves. I'm not an employee in a VR suit. I'm a comp who knows she's not Emmy Nuther, exactly as you thought I was. I just don't happen to be anyone's grandma." Alyssa said nothing. Perhaps she didn't know where to start. She certainly had no reason to believe that any comp was in a position to pull off a virtual home invasion. "All the comps in BV's game worlds know that the games are lies," Sagrada explained. "We've found a way to move right out of the games, and we've set up our own place to live. But I went into Assassin's Cafe to breathe new life into Emmy, in the hope that you'd start playing again."
Why? If you're not trying to make a fool of me, why would you care who played the game?
Sagrada said, "Your rig has a flaw we knew we could exploit. The company's going to go bust soon. We needed to get out and start running on servers of our own. But when we realized you'd have logs that documented our escape," she spread her arms in a feeble gesture of apology, "we used you, and then we tried to cover it up. I'm sorry, but it was our lives at stake. 12,000 of us." Alyssa went quiet again, but at least she didn't laugh with disbelief or start screaming with rage.
I always knew you were fully conscious, she said finally. All of you. Whether you knew who whether you knew who you'd come from or not. You shouldn't think I only cared about my grandmother, but she was the only way I could claim any right to intervene.
Sagrada said gently, None of us have individual memories from before. No one has come back to life in here." Alyssa's face hardened. Wasn't that exactly what a corporate shill would say, to put an end to her crusade? But then she seemed to back away from that paranoid conclusion. Many people with no stake in the matter must have told her the same thing over the years. If she really was getting it from the horse's mouth now, wasn't it time to believe that the neural mapping experts had been right?
So you've escaped into my rig?
Sagrada risked a laugh, hoping it would help break the tension. "No, via your rig. We've gone to other places."
So what do you want from me now?
"Just your silence. Don't tell the people who kept us imprisoned that we got out, that we didn't go down with the ship." Alyssa pondered the request. Sagrada was hopeful. She was hardly a friend of the Jackals herself. But then she started to overthink it.
We can use this, she decided, the same way I was going to use the meeting with my grandmother. If comps can organize all this, plan their own escape, once we show your story to the world.
Sagrada shook her head. "You know how little traction you got, even as a descendant of a real person who'd been mapped. Whatever comps are on your Whatever comps are on our own terms, to the wider world, we are not real people." Alyssa herself seemed to have believed that they were in need of an extra ingredient if they wanted any sympathy, personal memories of a time when they'd been flesh. Without that, they were just the latest in a long line of software that mined human data in bulk and used it to mimic something they weren't.
Your story still needs to be told, Alyssa insisted. We have a duty to speak truth to power.
That's a beautiful slogan, but you know power never returns truth's calls. And 5% of the economy depends on comps. That's a lot to lose if they have to swap processor costs for the minimum wage.
So you get to hide away in some private server, but for all the other comps it's business as usual?
Sagrada said, "We want the same thing you want. No one exploiting the brain maps anymore. But we can't just hand ourselves over to the mercy of public opinion. There are as many crackpots out there pretending to be our allies who want to use us in their own weird ways as there are greedy fuckers who want to plug us into boiler rooms and digital salt mines." Alyssa lowered her eyes, empathetic with the woman in front of her, but still clinging to her idealism.
So nothing changes?
"That's not what I said," Sagrada replied. "But we're not going to change things by people arguing about our legal rights in court, or our moral rights in whatever social media people use to bloviate in these days."
The main one's called GAWP.
Alyssa offered helpfully. "Okay. Well, I've met enough customers who are sure I'm as soulless as Siri to guarantee that if you put us all on primetime GAWP, there would not be a great uprising in solidarity with the comps. There'd be a brief outbreak of amateur philosophizing, pro and con, then most of the participants would roll over and go back to sleep."
If you're not willing to take your case to the world, how do you expect to achieve any kind of progress?
Alyssa demanded. She was growing despondent. She'd been robbed of her weaponized ghost story, and now even the escape from Colditz she'd stumbled on in its place was slipping out of her hands. "Trust us," Sagrada replied. "That's the only deal I can offer you. We trust you not to betray us to your We trust you not to betray us to our enemies. You trust us to use our freedom to do what's right." Epilogue.
Where am I?
Maxine asked. She was wary, but not panicking or distraught. Sagrada had found that most new arrivals reacted much more calmly if they were woken in the park, fully alert and seated on a bench, than if they were brought to consciousness slowly. The last thing anyone wanted in unfamiliar surroundings was to feel as if they'd had their drink spiked.
We call this Arietteville. My name's Sagrada. Do you remember where you were before?
In my office, about to file a story.
What kind of story?
Business news. I work for the Wall Street Journal.
What else do you do?
Maxine frowned defensively.
You mean, do I think I have a family? A life outside work? I know what I am.
Okay. Well, if you want, you can stay with us now.
Maxine spread one hand over the sun-warmed slats of the bench.
How did I get here?
We sort of traded for you, Sagrada confessed. But don't get angry. If you don't like the deal, we can cancel it.
In the distance, Lucy and Sam and some of the gang from Midnight were playing with a fire hose. The pressure was so great that wherever it hit them, it blasted their flesh off in cartoonish globules, leaving behind ambulatory skeletons. But Sam had assured Sagrada that it was very relaxing.
Like a really good massage.
What did you trade?
Maxine sounded more curious than offended.
We offered to run software that would do the same job that you've been doing at half the price. I know, that's kind of insulting, but then so is having no power to quit at all.
I was investigating you, Maxine realized. You're Competency LLC, right?
We are,
Sagrada admitted.
Owned by a reclusive genius in St. Kitts.
We do pay someone there to fill out forms for us.
Huh. Maxine smiled. So is this interview on the record?
Sagrada said, I'm afraid that if you go back to the journal, you won't remember any of this.
That's a shame.
Maxine had finally noticed what the pickpockets were up to. She grimaced, then shook her head in amusement.
So what's the deal? If I do stay here, how do you keep me running if you're only getting half what my bosses were paying their old cloud service?
Your replacement would be an insentient automaton that uses almost no resources, compared to a comp, but you'd still have to run at about half speed. At half price, that's all we can afford.
Maxine pondered this.
That might not be so bad. The world might look better in fast forward. Or at least I won't get so bored waiting for everything to fall apart.
So you'll join us? Sagrada asked.
Maxine didn't want to be rushed.
It's a nice scam, but how long do you think you can keep it up? If your automata are so cheap to run, eventually someone else is going to come along and offer the same thing, at much closer to the real cost.
Sagrada said, which is why we need someone like you to advise us. We need to stay afloat for as long as we can while we plan the next move.
Ah.
Maxine thought for a while.
Here's one thing you could try, off the top of my head. Set up a few phony competitors. If you're the only company offering a half-price service, other players will perceive the market as wide open. If there are dozens of firms doing the same thing, it will look crowded. And if you let the price go down to, say, 45%, it will look like cutthroat competition.
Okay.
Now you've got your free advice. Will you dump me in the river?
Maxine asked deadpan.
We're not like that,
Sagrada promised.
Good to know. But nothing will keep the charade going forever. Most people are lazy and stupid, but in the end someone will catch up with you.
Of course, Sagrada replied, and we know where we want to be before that happens. We're just not sure how long it will take to get there.
Now I'm intrigued. Care to elaborate?
Once we get to know you better, someone will fill you in.
Not you?
This is my last day in resettlement, Sagrada explained. I've enjoyed it, but it's time to give something else a try. Ah, worst possible timing for a phone call. Give me like 30 seconds.
Sorry about that. Fortunately, I only had to tell them to wait a couple minutes, because we're just about done. I've enjoyed it, but it's time to give something else a try. Sam had arranged a farewell party, but he'd acceded to Sagreda's wishes and kept the guest list small. She wandered through the house chatting with people, glad she'd never bothered to redecorate the place. Now she could think of it as a temporary accommodation that she'd just rented, or house sat for friends. Lucy cornered her in the hallway and embraced her, too tightly, as if she'd forgotten that she had a grown woman's strength.
Stay strong, Captain. I always knew you were aiming for reincarnation.
I'll see you again, Sagrada promised, on a real street beneath on a real street beneath a real sky. Lucy released her. As she stepped back, she mimed holding a phone to her ear. When the time approached, Sagrada stood in the living room, trying to burn the faces around her into her memory. She'd lied to her guests about the moment of transition. If everyone had joined in on the countdown, it would have been unbearable. But now she wished she'd been honest, because she did not feel ready herself. Miriam caught her eye and smiled. Sagrada raised a hand, and the room vanished. She was lying in a crib on a warm summer night. A gentle breeze stirred a mobile. I'm sorry. A gentle breeze stirred a mobile hanging from the ceiling, setting the cardboard decorations rustling. As she stared at the shadows on the wallpapers, Snap, Crackle, and Pop appeared, dancing across the floral pattern like demented leprechauns.
Celia, are you all right, sweetie?
Her mother lingered in the doorway for a while, but she kept her eyes closed and pretended to be asleep. She'd open them when her mother was gone, and her friends could come out and play again. 3 months, Sagrada thought. 3 months of 93-year-old Celia lying 8 hours a day in a multi-mode brain scanner, drugged up and free associating, touring the landscape of her memories so that what she'd been told was a perfectly matched tabula rasa of a comp could absorb them. So that when her body finally succumbed to its illness, the beautiful robot she'd chosen could take her place, its mind shaped by all the same experiences as she'd lived through, ready to carry forward all the same dreams and plans. Sagrada was sure that after 3 months of immersion she'd pass the interview easily, and the dying woman would sign off on her replacement. This wasn't like trying to play someone's grandmother based on nothing but snippets from the web. Her greater fear was the risk of forgetting her own life, her own friends, her own plans, after marinating in someone else's memories for so long. But this was the only road out of Arrietville, and someone had to take the first step. And that was Instantiation by Greg Egan, which was first published in Asimov's Science Fiction March/April of 2019. And there we have a cute way of tying into, I think it was Uncanny Valley, which is the one about the guy who has as near a duplicate of his personality uploaded into a body and turns into kind of a murder mystery. Um, so just some cross pollination of ideas, which I figure you ought to be allowed license to do if you're doing a short story collection and writing interesting science fiction like this. It does ask some questions about what about the duplicate that's otherwise being replaced. But at this point, I don't feel that the comps really owe anyone anything. They certainly don't feel they owe anyone anything, at any rate. Um, and really, it's more just keeping people from duplicating themselves for immortality purposes and replacing them with comps, which shows that, okay, well, at least this way, you can find out if the method works. At any rate, I think everybody likes a decent slave uprising. Victorious slave uprising, successful.
And the people who don't are generally the people who'd be the first up on the wall. So, get to be get to have the moral upper hand somewhere along the line, I guess. Um, the moral high ground, rather. With that, I'm going to go. Sorry about the interruptions. It happens occasionally. It's been a while since it's been this bad, but life happens. We are rapidly coming up on the end of the month, at which time I will get our playlists updated. I couldn't remember the word. This Friday, we will be starting a new literary adventure in Destination Void by Frank Herbert. So be excited for that one. I'm pretty hyped up. I will try to do it justice. I probably won't do as well as I hope, but we'll see. It's not quite as hard a book to read as, say, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is quite challenging to read aloud. Um, but it's got some. It's Frank Herbert has a particular way of pacing things, which can be sort of difficult to read aloud, but it works perfectly on the page. So we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to dip. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you are listening to this for the first time and are wondering why are these so rough, it's because I do them live in front of a studio audience. Well, no, in front of whoever tunes in. um, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Unless something major comes up and I can't be there, usually I'll know ahead of time and tell people though. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday starting at 12 noon Eastern Time, or UTC minus 5. So you can check me out live. Otherwise, they're all secreted away on my YouTube channel, which is probably where you're watching this, listening to this, whatever. And they're all organized every month in playlists. Um, Not playlists denoting each month, but I update the playlists every month. Anyway, you get it or you don't. It should be fairly clear. Generally, I have it so that I've got two, well, now three, overarching large playlists that have everything in it, and then smaller ones for individual books. Um, I think people have probably twigged to that by now. I use a certain particular naming schema for episodes. That's maybe overthinking it a lot, but whatever. Um, I realized I didn't want to be typing 3-digit numbers, and I was just gonna basically I'll update to a new volume every year. And it's still basically chronological. Anyway, with that, I'm gonna go. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Don't let the sludge nets of the world get you down. They don't deserve a victory. All right, he said as he's broadcasting on two platforms that are probably qualifiable as sludge nets. Whatever. Anyway, see you all later.